3PNR with Adam R. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Adam R. And joining me again is my buddy, Elric Ragoczy. Elric, how you doing, sir?
Doing good, man. Doing good. Glad to be back.
Glad to have you on. We're going to cover a variety of subjects, right?
Totally.
Namely, yeah. I mean, so in your life, you come from the occult, and
correct.
Outside of a few, I mean, when I say a few, a handful of people where I discuss ufology, like in religious settings, a handful of people representing, Christian backgrounds are willing to accept the idea that there's potentially life that's not human somewhere out there. And no one else seems, it's either, and these are good theories. They form theories like that they're potentially us from the future, and or the majority of them are claiming them to be demons or some other angelic thing. And I don't understand why it's so hard for certain religions to say, look, the space is enormous and there could very well be life elsewhere.
No, definitely. It really comes down to the fear of not being alone, in the sense, that humanity isn't the only sentient species. We've been on this planet so long that people are afraid to think, because we've been the dominant species, the sentient, driven species. So it's like, it's a fear that there's something greater than us, which is funny that, religious sides would have a fear of that.
Right.
Like that idea. But the real thing of it being something greater than us that's more sentient, probably 2 to 5 billion years at, minimum, more advanced than us, is kind of frightening to, the human mind.
Right. I would think that if you're from an organized religion and you're claiming your God is the Almighty, right? The Almighty, big word, that it's not impossible that an architect of that power can make not just our universe, but universes plural and planets plural and life plural, right?
Oh, definitely.
I mean, I don't know. I think in the next decade, I think we're already within this decade guaranteed that we're going to be going to some of these moons that are just in our star system. And it's guaranteed we found another star system that's like 40 light years away, which is about 60 years humanity time traveling at our current technology. We're going to find at the very minimum, we're going to find bacteria at the very minimum. And even that's going to offset a little stuff. So I don't know. It especially on the tail of this supposed disclosure we had the other day, which is laughable. I think it's time for people to open their minds more and make room for the idea. Again, if there's an almighty creator, the architect, make room for the idea he made everything, everywhere, period.
Mm-hmm. It even says in their text, let us make man in our image,
right?
Which implies multiples,
right?
Multiple beings. So it's like, if that's the case, and if they're going to follow the scripture in that sense, if they're going to follow it, then why is it so hard to believe? As a Luciferian, I even recognize that to be truth. So it's like, why is it so astounding that it could be a higher species? I mean, we've been seeing it in movies in the past 10 to 15 years. Prometheus, it kind of gives that angle that it was a race of non-terrestrial beings that created humanity,
Right. And, to your point, I don't know a lot. I grew up Catholic, and then eventually I just got away from religion because I had a hard time subscribing to something I couldn't see, right? That's just, why I'm doing a podcast, why I'm going to go out there and look. But the point I make is, if you're willing to accept the yin, you have to be willing to accept the yang, right? And so for you as a Luciferian, right, I find that story, I think they I guess we'll use the word demonize, no pun intended. They demonize Lucifer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But from what I'm gathering, and you'll know more about it obviously than I, it seems to me that it's not so much that Lucifer was evil as it is he just saw things from a different perspective from his creator. Sound about right?
Not even saw it differently. I mean, as I've discovered through spiritual workings, it wasn't even a case of seeing it differently. It really come down to seeing it for what it was. The creator, aka God of the Old Testament, El Shaddai, the Almighty, his throne was being usurped by a lesser force and being subverted. Because if you look, the Old Testament God is different than the New Testament God. Widely different traits, personalities, actions, everything. Right. And while that can be not implausible for spirits to be two-faced, but not in a negative way of two-faced, like just two different personalities. But it's really a wide difference. The El Shaddai that I know and have worked with and communed with many a times is very loving, very fatherly like. So the usurping of his throne kind of shows it's kind of like the jealous son or the jealous uncle in that sense, where Yahweh comes in. So it's like Lucifer seen it for what it was, that they were trying to take Father's throne away and take it for themselves. And if we look biblically, there's even, supporting evidence of that, in the sense of, if you look at most of the problems, who caused them? It was usually Gabriel. Michael was usually the main antagonist in a lot of problems, showing up saying, oh, this is the Lord's will. Well, really, it's not Father's will, it's the Lord's will, which if you go back to Genesis, like I said, at the beginning there, let us make man in our image. That's referring to multiple beings there.
Right.
So it really kind of starts to take shape, that you start to see that this is almost kind of like a corporation with a CEO that's got a good vision and drive, but the board of directors not so well versed, but they want control because they think they know better.
Agreed. Agreed. And that's, so again, it comes down to perspective. And that being said, and I ask these questions to a lot of people, it's the big one. What happens when we die? And, I get so many different answers, but at the same time, they all kind of blend to be the same. And it has a lot to do with frequencies and vibrations and what level you're operating on, right? Which also could be, it could be extended to perception. Again, what you can perceive. And the stigma around religion as a whole, like the Christianity's been a dominant religion for a very long time on this planet. The longest running empire so far amongst humanity. Now, predating Christianity and religion, you have this planet, which is, again, 4 billion-ish year old planet. Who's to say what lived here prior, right? Who's to say what existed here prior?
Yeah, the dinosaurs, I mean,
right.
We think of them as just dumb animals because that's all we encounter. That's what we encounter. Right. But at the same time, you have to stop and think, were they really just dumb, mindless animals? Were they lizards just running around trying to eat, mate, feed, kill, repeat?
Right.
Or maybe, if they were around for as many millions of years as they were, they had to evolve something,
Indeed. And the reason we're able to find their fossils, they were very large animals. If you rewind, now that's 65 million years ago. You rewind time 1 billion years ago. Let's say there's another being bipedal, give or take about our size, maybe lesser or taller. There would be no trace of that. That fossil record would be gone, right? Because there's shows that even show like modern day man over the course of time will eventually, if we were to leave this planet, any trace of us over the course of millions of years will just be unfound. We can't find it. Metal will give way to rust and dust and et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of naysayers say things like, well, why are aliens bipedal? It's kind of, and I said this last night in a podcast, most things in nature that work well doesn't alter. It might evolve slightly, but if it works, why fix it? And if you look, and if you look at the construct of the universe and the cosmic web, and then you look at a spider web and you look at trees and the bark and just everything, if it works well, it's not going to change. So bipedal seems to work well. And if it works well here, you better believe it's going to work well elsewhere. It just, certain things might be different. Like you can't breathe the same kind of air. The atmosphere is different. You're larger or smaller, depending on your planet, the size and the gravity that's involved with it.
Yeah. I mean, even the apex predators of the dinosaurs were bipedal, T-Rex, Velociraptor, a handful of other ones that were apex. Even some of the more apex omnivores were still bipedal, and so it's like it's a common thing. And when people ask, as a former contactee, people ask, why are they so humanoid? And it's like, well, maybe they're not humanoid. Maybe humans are more like them because they've been here longer. I mean, go back to ancient Sumeria. You're looking at 6,000 to 8,000 years of traceable history. And they've got carvings of bipedal lizards in spacesuits that resemble what we used in the 1960s to go to the moon.
Yeah. And by the way, that is prior to television and sci-fi, right? There was none of that then.
Yeah.
This is something that they observed, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Like it wasn't just, oh, hey, I'm inspired by Star Trek, I'm going to carve this cool little stone, So yeah, it's like the Tower of Babel story. If you really look at it objectively and not in a allegory sense, it sounds a lot like they were trying to build a space launch pad,
right?
Because they were witnessing the sky gods, as they called them, using this launch pad. They couldn't describe it outside of, as best as they knew, in the limited technology of their own. But the Tower of Babel, when you get down into it, in some of the other bits and pieces that exist of writings about it, it sounds a lot like a launch pad, like we use at Cape Canaveral,
Right.
And it would make sense why, quote unquote, God would want to destroy it, because man wasn't ready to venture into the stars. Hell, man wasn't ready to venture off the freaking continent that he was on.
We're barely eligible to speak to one another.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and the whole belief, or the whole backstory that, we all had a common tongue back then, which would have been either Aramaic or a derivative of ancient Sumer, at that time, maybe even before that, if we're going, because I myself look at it as humans and dinosaurs walk together. It's not that far-fetched to really think. People ask, well, why haven't we found skeletons from early man? Well, when the continents broke, or when Pangaea broke apart, and you look at the cataclysmic flood and just sheer devastation, look at the recent tsunami that hit was that 2006 when it hit Southeast Asia, that really big one?
Yeah, one in 06, but the major one was in 04, right?
04, okay.
Right.
Yeah, that one that hit, there were people that were on that beach. They will never recover their body because there is no body to recover.
Right.
Their bones have been turned into dust in the ocean. Like, their remnants of them are on the ocean floor, currently. Right. And that's all they'll ever be. So it's like, that's just a small scale. Think of that on a worldwide scale of one giant continent breaking into 7. Any human skeletons or human bodies are going to be annihilated. Of course, we're not going to find skeletons.
Yeah, especially bones with less density. Like a dinosaur bone, some of them are the size of my body.
Yeah, or bigger. I mean, some of them are the size of a small Volkswagen vehicle. So it's like, yeah, of course, those are going to last millions of years because it's going to take erosion that long to even start to really chip away at it. But a human bone, you can, I mean, we should, it shouldn't be so hard to really think when we look, and we found bodies from the Mafia era of the 60s, 50s and 60s, in mass graves that are so badly decomposed, they could never identify it. Like, they have trouble placing exactly what year this person was killed.
Right. And you can't even abstract DNA from that because the elements definitely get to it. There's levels of erosion that take place as well, depending on where it is, right?
Yeah. So that so if it took place, say if there was a human walking, running in this case from this unknown, earth shake, they're running alongside the dinosaurs trying to get away in what would be modern day Canada. They're trying to get away. The cold, that's going to preserve them, once it starts to get cold and such, which it probably was, because, has our polar shift happened? Possibly. We haven't found any scientific or even spiritual gnosis of that to kind of validate one way or another. So it's like, if it was indeed cold, the cold would preserve up there. But if you're in, say, modern day Florida, when that broke apart, you're either going to get washed into the freaking ocean, or you're buried somewhere so deep into swampland that you'd have to basically drain Lake Okeechobee to find it, you know?
Not to mention, there's probably micro creatures that would feed on the bone anyhow. I mean, we see that.
Oh, yeah.
We see that all the time now. I mean, a couple things like the Tower of Babel. So when I was a kid growing up, I would ask why there's different, races, why there are different languages. And the answer was, well, the Tower of Babel story, right? So when you're a kid, you subscribe to it. Your parents tell you, or an elder in your group tell you, and that's law. When you start developing a sharper intellect, when you start hitting about, preteens, and you're like, well, here's NASA going to space. We went beyond the clouds. So if we're going to find heaven, I think we would have found it by now. And then as you learn about geology and the planet, you think, well, hell's definitely not in the middle of the planet. That's just metal, molten metal. And then you explore the ideas of physics. And then you come to the realization that, depending on how you behave here on Earth, because I personally think Earth's a proving ground, depending what frequency you are or how you're behaving here is what realm you'll go to, right? It's got to be like a dimension you enter. And so I don't fully subscribe to the idea that Satan's evil, nor are the angels good. I think their perception and their existence is greater than ours. And whatever's happening between them really doesn't play an effect on us ultimately. That's my personal thoughts anyway. What do you have for that?
So dimensions, I agree. Having experienced them in a spiritual setting, both what we would call heaven and hell, I will point out my experience personally, and I've known others that have done similar. Hell is indeed not hot. It is cold. It has a very cold feeling, which derives from its removal from El Shaddai's grace, which astounds the monotheistic religions when you point that out, because
that kind of echoes what the Greeks thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Who was it? I want to say Milton in Paradise Lost actually made mention of it, which was great. Very accurate. The deeper you get, the colder it gets. I mean, he stopped at 7 levels because of the 7 deadly sins, but it actually extends beyond that. But it gets colder and colder, at least as we perceive it. Keep in mind, spiritual bodies don't feel temperature as human bodies do because it lacks the nerves and such, but it can sense the different energies, and the energies create a cold or hot feeling. It's a common thing in people like myself that do channelings, possessions, evocations, invocations. We can tell by the energies depending on the temperatures of what entity we are dealing with. The Tower of Babel, the difference. I questioned that at a very young age.
Right.
Because it kind of makes sense about the changing of the languages, but it doesn't explain the wide difference of races.
Right.
And then it's like, as I got a little bit older, I think I was in a very advantageous position somehow of being able to come across material that talks about the Dropa of Asia, the Dagons of Central to South Africa, the Hyperboreans of north of the Celts, which, as we know, would be the Arctic, but apparently there was some race of beings that lived in the Arctic, and the Arctic was not a frozen wasteland. And that's just 2,000, 3,000 years ago, so it really starts to make you question. So I question the Tower of Babel in that sense of the different races. I personally see it as the different races all have different extraterrestrial origins.
Right.
The Nordic beings that we hear about, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, or the red-haired, green-eyed.
What are your thoughts on the Nordics?
The Nordics I've encountered, they are very much, as one would imagine, kind of like how we imagine in fiction, like the old school Celts and Vikings.
That's exactly what I thought. Like when I first heard of the Nordic, my initial thought was this is hopeful thinking. These are beautiful fucking people. You know what I mean? But who am I to say? Because again, my perception's limited. I lack software to perceive certain things. That's why I think certain psychics can perceive things that I can't. I lack the software. Does that make sense?
I wouldn't say you lack the software. You just lack the experience. You could work with me, as a kind of student I could take you through various spiritual exercises. There's a handful of other people I could recommend you that I know could do well. And, by the end of that year or 6 months, even 3 months, you would be experiencing a lot more and witnessing a lot more. I actually have a podcast on Order of Defiant Darkness with Joshua Savage. It's 3 hours long, but there's 3 hours that we didn't record in between that. And he started having extraterrestrial encounters during the interview because of myself and my co-host at the time. Because of our strong connection to that, they noticed, hey, this person is inquiring about us, and these two are strongly tied to us, so let's introduce ourselves. And, he was like hearing stuff on his roof and seeing things out of the corner of his eye. So it's kind of crazy and how soon they can show up when there's a strong connection. So they can show up spiritually, they can show up in dreams, astrally, they can show up even physically. I had one client that was really interested in extraterrestrials, and using my connection, they began to show up physically. Like they got to the point where the extraterrestrials were leaving calling cards in the person's paintings. They would literally change the painting. The person would go to bed, they would have a shape. They would wake up and that shape had changed as they slept. And it wasn't like the paint ran, but the shape of entirely had changed. So it's like these were undeniable changes. And that's how the person got in contact with extraterrestrial life forms.
It sounds to me that you have to, I guess the best way to put it is to start programming yourself to be able to do that, right? An expansion of mind thought.
It's mind, body, and spirit. It really comes down to, like you said earlier, the frequency. If most people operate at a certain frequency, what I like to jokingly call the normies operate at a certain frequency. They cannot perceive higher vibrations or even significantly lower vibrations of entities around them. It's kind of why like ghost shows and stuff drive me a little bit batshit up the wall, because you've got a person who's a semi-normie trying to go out here and chase, spiritual beings that their body and mind and eyes are not calibrated to see. And they're like, oh my God, I think I heard a ghost. No, you heard the wind. Oh, I just saw an orb. Well, yeah, you might have just caught a glimpse of a fragment of that being. But, you got to learn. I myself was born with it, probably because of the way I was born, the traumatic way that I was born, I think kind of reconfigured me to that. And I've met other people. One person I know specifically, she was born very similar to the way I was. And she too has grown up being able to see and hear spirits. We were labeled crazy as children, possibly mentally ill. But over time, it became obvious that no, we're not, just Arkham Asylum inpatients. We're actually seeing something that is there that others don't.
To support that, a lot of people I speak to about the subject, whether it be paranormal, whether it be ufology or religion, I hear a very similar pattern there. And it's something in their brain is unlocked. They're capable of perceiving things naturally without hyper focus, right? Without meditation. And so you, like a lot of other people, were born with the software automatically, right? You didn't have to program it. You didn't have to exercise it. It was there, present. And it made me think about something just now. Eventually I'm going to go do the documentary. It never occurred to me that I'm not mature enough at a mental level to prepare myself to not only, prepare for what I might see versus prepare myself to be able to see. I never considered that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even use the word mature. It's just attuned. I had a client once ask me, because they were so envious that I can see and hear spirits the way I do, that, they wanted to learn how to do it. And I told them it's like a radio. They were close to my age, so they remember the old days of rabbit ears of radio. You just got to twist the radio just enough to pick up the frequency. Right. And once you do, then, slight little twists and turns or, flexes and whatnot will get you right on that frequency. For me, I've gotten to the point after doing this for almost 20 years now, actually being 2022, I started in about 2001, 2002. So it has been almost 20 years exactly. Doing it for so long, I don't pick up on the very low vibrations because I've gone so far up in the vibrational frequency, like sitting next to celestials, aka angels, sitting next to demons, aka infernals, El Shaddai himself coming to me. That's a frequency that it needs no introduction. Watching space and time literally rip open before you and seeing him come out is unlike anything. I actually understand the biblical references where they talk about, the ones that have seen, Moses, his hair went white because of seeing El Shaddai. I fully understand that because it is a shock, even as a very adept magician and sorcerer and occultist, it still is a shock at that sheer level of vibration. You can feel exactly what that is. It's undeniable. So it really comes down to just tuning yourself in, learning to configure your spiritual radar, as it were.
Right. Now, circling back to Christianity, the longest running empire on planet Earth, and I'm not bashing Christianity. Again, I have a lot of relatives that are Christian. I grew up Catholic. I don't have a religion per se. I just think there's an architect, and I think I'm not even going to call it supernatural, things we can't perceive or comprehend anyway, or the majority, as you would call the norms. So I don't personally have a religion I subscribe to. But through the course of history, it's been, and the more I read about it, the more shocked I am about it. It's been the habit that Christianity goes to certain continents. They find other people there. Their beliefs are not lined up. And the attitude, in short, is believe like us or be punished, whether it be from an entity or us, right? Mm-hmm. So that being said, a lot of wars in history fought in the name of God, right? That guy's been at the helm of a lot of big ones. So with that in mind, why is it that they perceive Satan as evil or Lucifer as evil? Why is he perceived evil when everything I read doesn't sound evil? It sounds like he's trying to draw a line in the sand because his perspective is different than the perspective of his, I'll call creator, I guess.
Well, so this is where we break down. For me, I would bring up my Luciferian Gnosticism background there. That comes from, again, the usurping of the throne where El Shaddai is being slowly ousted by Yahweh, Michael, and a handful of other archangels because they see it as Father is too lenient with the humans, too hands-off. And he also reveres them too much. He believes them to be amazing, whereas the Celestials see him as weak. They disobeyed him in the garden. They've failed him time and time again. So they have a disdain for humanity at this point. And it grows. And no matter how they try to manipulate humanity ends up point blank fucking it up,
Right.
The 10 Commandments, the burning bush, the flood, all this. You just go piece by piece. And it's just like, okay, no matter how, looking at it from a celestial standpoint, it's like, how many times can you give the monkeys a direction and they still screw it up, Tool's song Right Into is a good euphemism to throw in here of right into, where there's one, they're bound to divide it. And so it's like the Celestials are getting fed up with this. Well, Lucifer, on the other hand, and the whole entire rebellion is looking at it as they're not fucking up. They are experiencing it different than we would. They're experiencing it through multiple ways. They have a limited capacity for thought and for perception. But with each new thought and perception, they take it in a new direction. We can see 1,000 actions in advance. They cannot. So they go forth and create 1,000 more and 10,000 more. All these possibilities, they are really the core essence of chaos. And yet order, there's order in their chaos and chaos in their order. So Lucifer really comes down to being humanity's staunch supporter in that sense. And the way he sees it is they need to be refined. They need to remember what they come from. They come from the breath of of Father, the breath of El Shaddai, that's mentioned biblically, even goes back, you mentioned Christianity being the longest running. I would actually say Judaism is longer running than that because it bears its
that's a good point. That's where it stems from. Good point.
Yeah, it descends. Christianity is predated by Judaism. Judaism is actually predated by Chaldeans. Chaldean goes clear back into Babylon back to Samaria. And before Samaria, we really don't know because they didn't write it down and most of the people have perished without any traces. So it's like, even biblically, a Christian, if you're a Christian listener and you have any question of what I'm saying here, go back and look in Genesis where it mentions the Lord has smited the sea beast. What sea beast are they talking about? There was no sea beast that was prior mentioned. If you go back, that story of the Almighty and the Lord, or Elohim, smiting the sea beast actually goes clear back to Samaria, where Marduk slays Tiamat, the sea beast, the great beast, and half of her body becomes the sky, half of her body becomes the earth. Then you start to see it all a little more big picture. And that's one of the things I'm working on.
Well, to me, when I hear that, what I think that's our best way of describing something that's happening at a larger scale, down to perception again, right?
Yeah.
When you talk about celestial beings and or a greater existence, there's really no way that it's kind of like, I guess, go back in time with a cell phone and give it to a tribe, right? That there's no technology around them. Their description of that cell phone is going to be far different than what we know it to be, because they're just based on the best that they know. To them, the magic rock with lights coming out of it, you know what I mean? Because they have no clue. So for us, when we're witnessing something at a scale of that size that's happening at the cosmic level, the best we could address it as it's definitely a sea beast, because it wasn't long ago where we gave constellations, that's Orion, that's his belt. There's the Big Dipper. There's a scorpion up there, that's Scorpio. You know what I mean? We're basing it on earthly things that we can comprehend, and we're translating it to greater things at our level anyway.
Well, and another thing I've attributed, I don't know for certain, I've never dug in. I might do so to see if any other people share the idea. The great sea beast story, like I said, humans and dinosaurs walking together. So what if there was a very sentient dinosaur, as it were, that was walking the earth and causing problems for let's call them the Anunnaki, the mixture of sky gods and humans. What if it was causing problems and a hybrid, as it were, slayed this sentient dinosaur? Well, the ancient man, like you just said, with the limited ability to communicate, would say, the great beast was slain. Half of her skin became the sky and half became, the ground.
Right.
It may have even extended. Maybe it wasn't even in a human essence. Maybe it literally was some type of higher being that, maybe there was some kind of alpha draconian creature that held great power, and one of the Anunnaki slayed it and literally created new land masses, or created difference, created some part of the sky as we know it. We're looking at power well beyond human comprehension. I'm not even going to sit here after all these years, and anybody else that's, gone through the depths would not even sit and say, yes, I can explain this perfectly, because we can't. Even with our, vast spiritual experiences and physical and mental, we still are confined within this bubble, as it were.
Right. And a problem today is we measure things. We measure intelligence scaled by, size of vocabulary, arithmetic, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, you go back to Samaria and their text and and even in Egypt, it's exhibited very minimal characters, very minimal vocabulary. But when you could use so few words and have a greater understanding, I think that shows a higher intelligence.
Oh, yeah. Look at the pyramids. They're actually starting to look at it as the pyramids were there before the Egyptians.
That's no doubt to me. Look, I just recently said this on a podcast I just did. I don't think the pyramids were made when they say they were, and I'm sure a lot of people. This has been said. Graham Hancock believes the same thing. Clearly, the size of those stones. I don't even think we have machinery today that can manipulate those stones.
No, we
right?
don't.
So whatever did that was at a technological level well more advanced than us, and it's very easy for me to think that, you know, our science says, well, you know, 65 million years ago the atmosphere is different, air was thicker. Fine. A billion years ago, I mean a billion, big number. It could very well be that there was an existence of, again, beings that were intelligent here, and they were probably very sophisticated, probably to the point where they maybe went interplanetary, but something happened. They're gone. And whatever machinery they had behind, like metal will rust and go away. But those stones, they're like basically mountains. They're there in pretty long. They'll be there long after the existence. They'll be around after us. Long after us. So,
and the sheer precision of them, you know,
right.
The fact that they 3 line up to a star arrangement that has not happened since 10,000 years ago, you know, which that predates the Egyptian culture. They were nowhere near as advanced as beyond mud huts
right
at 10,000 years. So it's like, how the hell were they moving stones when they could barely move themselves past, you know?
Well, if you look at all the structures around that were in the Egyptian period, they didn't stand the test of time, and the materials were not the same. So That being said, it's again, this is mankind. This is what we do. We're out there exploring. We find these big things. There's no doubt the Sphinx's face was altered by Egyptians. They definitely did that. That was not the original face of that statue, right? No. That was all, and you could tell by the scale of the size of the face versus every other feature on the body of that creature.
Well, see, here's the thing. This has been pointed out by dissenting archaeologists, and even, you know, I myself in my extensive research, because I'm fascinated by, you know, the origins of humanity. The nose of the Sphinx falling off was not because of the way it was carved. It was because it was added on later.
Right.
You know, you take a stone, and you can do this in a more rapid sense. Take a rock out of your garden, out of your driveway, off the side of the road. It don't matter. Put a lot of pressure via water or massive amounts of air if you have a good air blower. You know, run it over that stone. Yes, cracks will develop. You know, that is the pressurization of erosion, or the simulation of erosion over thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years.
Right.
But a stone that is intact and carved will not chip away like that. Whereas if you add to it, you know, if we added to Stonehenge right now without the proper forethought, it's going to erode in probably 1,000 years and collapse. So the original bits of Stonehenge will still stand. The added on parts will weather away. You know, even mortar will weather away. I mean, look at old brick houses that were built in the 1800s. I actually grew up in one. Its mortar held true 200 years later, but it had shown its signs of age. Whereas the pyramids and even the Sphinx, you can tell were one set stone carved. So it's like that level of precision. I mean, to carve out the Sphinx, you would need modern day lasers and CNC machining that are massive. Like, they would have to be the size of earth movers and, you know, earth digger cranes to carve that out of a solid sheet of stone. They sure as hell didn't have Caterpillar back then.
No.
You know.
And I can tell you, like, I watched a documentary. I started getting into Graham Hancock. I really like that guy. And because of getting in him, I started going down the rabbit hole of looking more into Egypt. And when you start realizing how tightly put together the stones in that pyramid are, like something to like a sheet of paper, that's crazy. You can't tell me primitive man with some logs and some ropes did that. That's not possible, period. You know?
They've actually, back in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, maybe at latest, they got curious and they hired some of the best architecture teams to come in and assess it.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that.
They tried to do it as we had commonly been told up to that point, that, oh, they just pushed it along logs. they got something like 5,000 people to try and push one stone that was equivalent to the pyramid, and it took them so long, and they only got halfway before they started running into problems because the sand started to shift under the weight. There is no way they carried it from the river that far in. And
not to mention that the stone, the composition of that stone and the type of that stone is not anywhere in that area. That was excavated from a far, far away distance. Like
I believe it came as far. It's farther south than Memphis was.
Right.
You know, Memphis, Egypt, not Memphis, America. For
a lot of people don't realize we got that name from Egypt.
Yeah, exactly. So it came
same
from
with
South Memphis.
Same with Philadelphia. That came from Egypt too.
Yeah, so it's like, looking at that on the map, if you go and look at an ancient map and then look at it today, one, they didn't have boats, supposedly. They didn't have boats that could cross the ocean. Do you know how much them stones weigh? Oh. You could not load that on a simple raft and float that thing upriver.
Yeah, it's not
going to happen.
Not to mention, again, it's very sophisticated machinery, very heavy-duty machinery had to have done that. Which leads me down the idea that something predated man, something built it, whether it be an earlier version of man, a more sophisticated version, and or another being altogether that existed here. Because now we're finding other temples that are. Here's what kills me, man. This thing's going on where these other governments around the world, they stop archaeologists from going to look at these things. Right? They're like in Egypt, you can't look between the legs of the Sphinx. It's like, why? And it comes down to this. It's a very proud thing for Egyptians to say, our people did this in ancient times and we're more advanced than you. I think that's a very proud thing that's what's going on. Rather than want to expand on historical education, that there's the idea that something might predate here. It might not be the Egyptians, right? You want to see examples of ancient technology? All right. The best I can think of is ancient Rome. There's a structure there. The concrete is still curing today, still curing.
Yep.
And so that's a marvelous thing to see made in ancient times, but it doesn't even come near the scale or the strength needed or the technology needed to construct the pyramids. There's no way.
Well, see, you mentioned about the Egyptians, being proud of that. It's funny because a great portion of modern day Egypt is not original Egyptians in that sense. The Kemet, that's what they were called back then, was Kemet. For the listeners that aren't, well versed in this, it was actually called Kemet, not Egypt. That name was given later on.
Right.
The Kemet were a completely different race of people. Most modern day Egyptians now are more genetically descended from the Ottoman Empire of the Middle East. The Dagon, if you go and look at the Dagon tribe, those are the closest to the Kemetians that still exist to this day. And even then, sadly, they've been genetically diluted because you can't keep, without a large portion of a genetic gene pool, you can't keep it really closely tied. The Dogon have tried to stay as true as possible, but they have been outside mixed with North African, South African, Central, like Congo, Middle Eastern and stuff, even Europeans. I have a tinge of Kemetian in my descendant that dates back probably 4,000 years or so. There's a weird lineage trace there, but so it's like that's just shows you how diluted the gene pool was. So modern day Egypt, with them not wanting to look at it, it's a part of the cover story of the national identity, the heritage. But at the same time, they don't want people knowing that there is something more than us still walking on this planet.
It troubles me. There's locations with LiDAR that we know beneath the surface in like Iraq, Iran, certain places in the Middle East. There's great things to be found, but we're prevented from going there to do it for stupid reasons to begin with, right? This is Holy Land, or this is, you're a foreign body. Look, it's archaeologists. And you know what flag they fly? They fly the flag of history. They just want to learn, they're not concerned about your ideology at all.
So you mentioned hidden. I'm going to give you and the listeners a little bit of a rabbit hole to dig into.
Sure.
So if you go to Google Earth, look Al-Hilla, Iraq. It's not hard to find. You can type it in. Spelling is Al-Hilliah. It's going to take you right exactly to that point. Now, there's something funny about Al-Hilla, Iraq. In the early days of the invasion of the early 2000s of Iraq, you know, when we were going after Saddam and weapons of mass destruction, yada, 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 Al-Hilla itself was designated by the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, and the Pentagon as a no-go zone for conventional ground forces. It was limited to special forces and intelligence divisions only. And you wonder why. It's like, what the hell? This isn't Baghdad. Was there some hidden silo? No, you go out and Google Maps or Google Earth and look. It's just a little squat town in the middle of the desert. Well, when you dig through, what was Al-Hilla long ago? That was Babylon. That was the center of Babylon as we know it. The gate of Ishtar actually still sets not too far from Al-Hilla, Iraq. What's left of it thanks to Islamic State. But in the early 2000s, if you actually go on Google Earth, it hasn't been censored or covered up since then. If you can go on the Wayback Machine and find, you know, old satellite images, you will find in I believe it's the southwest or southeast side of the city, or the town as it really would be considered, there are little circular shapes around. There's one on the southeast, one on the southwest, and one in the due north. They all look identical. What those are is, if you dig through what we would call stargates, and if you go back through ancient history, you will hear about the sky gods using these magical gates, much like the Gate of Ishtar, to appear before the humans. They were made of stone eventually, but there was something there prior. Al-Hilla being the steps of Babylon. We know Babylon was very critical to the sky gods and to early man. I mean, look at the Hanging Gardens, the Tower of Babel, the history of Babylon. Al-Hilla held that, and the powers that be, and I'm not even talking just U.S. government, British government, whoever, we're talking powers beyond that. It starts to sound like a conspiracy theory nut job from the X-Files, but I promise you there is something there.
Well, you know, you're right, because we have a list of the richest people on the planet, and that's what's on paper. You know what I mean? There are some billionaires out there that no one knows about. Fact.
And the powers that be go even beyond them. Right. You know, they themselves are just lowly pawns in that power scheme, which tells you what the average person is. The average person is not even a factor in that chessboard, you know. But the powers that be did not want Al-Hilla disturbed by conventional warfare because of the, you know, priceless treasures. And I don't mean monetary treasures. I mean the spiritual power center that's set in Al-Hilla because of its history. And going beyond that, you know, like I said, I mentioned about thanks to Islamic State, and I say that in full sarcasm, they destroyed part of the Gate of Ishtar supposedly because it was of the infidels. That's bullshit. That was a cover story. And again, it sounds like conspiracy theory, but I promise, do the digging, do the research.
Well, no, that happened. We know to a certainty. I mean, ISIS by themselves, were destroying ancient monuments and ancient things, like destroying them, blowing them up to spite us from finding it.
And, well, it wasn't because of their radical Islam belief. That was a cover story. That was all made up bullshit. And like I said, it sounds like conspiracy theory. Some people are probably going to write it off, but I promise if you do the digging, you will see they were not doing that because of religious belief. They were doing that because they didn't want that spiritual connection. They knew the energy that was in those. They knew people would be coming for that. That is why the world mobilized after Islamic State so hardcore. You know, America, Russia, two countries that can't get along. I mean, look at today. They stood together and said, hey, differences aside, fuck these guys,
right?
You know, and went after them because they understood the powers that be on that side, because there are two sides to the powers that be. One side wants to eradicate the Great Reset, the elimination of all but 500,000 people of the planet, you know. that side. And then you have the other side that wants humanity to flourish, to grow, which if you look back at the spiritual side, you've got the demiurge and the Luciferian rebellion. It's the two sides. It starts to take shape. And when you start looking at it through that scope, you start to understand, because you'll see there are some rich people. I mean, even David Rothschild, he's come out and said, if we're running the world, those of us that are insanely wealthy and of great power stance in that sense, if we're running the world, we're doing a very terrible job. And he himself admitted, he goes, if I was, if I'm in somehow control of this, I'm doing an awful job and I should be fired,
Right.
Which tells you he's sentient enough right there at that point. He knows something's going on, that there is a division. And we can even look at the media, look at the shift. You and I, Adam, we're very similar in age. Remember when education was unbiased, television programs were unbiased. It was just, here's the facts that as we know them, nothing more, nothing less.
Well, what changed that is we got to a state of where likes matter, where acknowledgement matters, where followers matter, and agenda is definitely going to play a role there, right? What flag are you flying? What's your ideology? Are you a Republican or a Democrat? What's your religion? Insanity, crazy shit. Instead of just learning.
It was actually even more than that. If I really think back, I can bet you I could pinpoint the year. I want to say 1996, maybe 97 was where the big shift in journalism came. Now, keep in mind, this is after the Vietnam era, because American journalism and media, even it reflected around the world, really, because America was such a powerhouse of inspiration. They learned that free reign of journalism kind of affected our outcome in Vietnam quite substantially. So they started to put a little bit of a clamp, but they didn't put enough of a clamp to full out censor, because they knew that wouldn't fly well in a very freedom loving society at that time, because you had the one thing that was the big deal was the patriot side, flew the flag of freedom of American choice and outcome. And even the hippies were like, hey man, I don't want the government affecting me. So they kind of had a shared ground in that. So the post-Vietnam journalism really kind of started to take shape as where the government was like, okay, maybe don't report this because it kind of affects us. By the 1970s, 1980s, they're starting to clamp down a little more. There's documents and stuff to support that the CIA and NSA and early precursors, the DIA and such, started to kind of get more in bed with the big journalism companies, the New York Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, coast to coast level of getting more in bed with the journalists so that they could kind of say, hey, don't run this story because bad,
Right. I mean, what they wanted is the people to echo what it is they've reported. Right. They wanted to be in sync. They want everyone.
Yeah.
We're doing God's work over here. Be a patriot. I mean, that's what they wanted. Unfortunately, when you, like you're saying, when you get to the 90s where it became a competitive market, between like CNN and then Fox had to make their 24-hour channel and thus started the wars of information. And it became whose agenda was stronger. How can we make this more appealing to the public so we get the ratings? And then you start losing fact. You're not getting news fact anymore. You're getting opinions based around some facts, right? Which is what we see today with what's going on in with Russia. It's a tremendous amount of there's things I hear on one station that you don't hear in another station. And when you listen to the BBC and some of these other foreign news stations, I'm hearing different things. They're all based in and around the same idea, the same facts, but they're twisted to see fit to whatever agenda that station's holding. And that drives me nuts.
Well, see, the agenda-driven, like I said, you and I are very close in age, so I don't know if you paid attention. I know I did. That the agenda-driven media came post 9/11.
Oh, yeah.
Remember how CNN and Fox News would criticize Bush left and right? W. Bush, they would criticize the hell out of him. And rightfully so. I mean, the dude's an excellent painter, probably very intelligent, but politically, he's short of a talking monkey.
Yeah.
You know,
he I hate to say it, but he was I liked Bush because of what he represented ultimately, but he was definitely the poster child for what a puppet was.
oh yeah, Cheney had his hand so far at Bush's ass. Bush might as well have been Peanut. You know?
I remember distinctly at the beginning, prior to 9/11, there was a massive hate campaign against him from the world over. And then post 9/11, a definite shift.
Yeah, all of a sudden he was the man to listen to. And it's like, I'm sorry, just 2 months ago, you guys were calling him an idiot. You know, the British, there were many British sitcoms that had a dumb American character that was very, very close to George W. Bush, you know. Hell, even our own comedians were making fun of him, you know. And it was from the left and right side of the aisle altogether. So it's like all of a sudden 9/11 happens, and all of a sudden George W. Bush is the leader of the free world, and he's the man to listen to. You know, he's at the G2 summit talking about how this and that, and everybody's like, oh, clap, clap, clap. I'm sorry, shit like that don't just change in a month, you know?
Let me ask you something. Do you think that Russia would invade the Ukraine if Bush were in office? I personally don't think they would have. Not with a Cheney behind them. I don't even think they would have did it with Barack Obama at the helm.
Oh yeah, they
definitely not with Trump there. That guy's.
Oh no, under Obama, you know, Putin has respect for Obama for trying. You know, he did have a lot of adversary things to his campaign, and in the sense, you know, Putin is not hidden about his dislike of leftist of any sort, mainly because he grew up under them.
Right.
But at the same, so would he have done it under Bush? Yes. Because he would have told Bush, screw you. I mean, keep in mind, the Russian Federation was still very getting off of its knees in the early 2000s. You know, they had just really started to kind of form a national identity that wasn't remnant of the Soviet Union. You know, that was early on in Putin. So, no, I don't think they would have done it under Bush at that time. Now, Bush today, oh, hell yes.
Oh, yeah, well, today, yeah.
But yeah, they would have told Bush to shove it. Same thing with Obama. With Trump,
Trump's he's got like a hair trigger personality. I think Putin would have been like, well, we could, and I could threaten nuclear war, but I think that maniac would go there. You know what I mean?
Oh, so, I don't even think it was that. It's just the sheer amount of respect that Putin has for Trump because Trump didn't back down. I mean, you know, look, as much as people hate Trump, go back to where he pushed.
Can I say something?
So, you know, when you look at Trump, where he pushed, I think it was Justin Trudeau aside to stand in front at that summit. What was it, 2017? You know, that conveyed a lot because, you know, they were trying to push him to the back because, well, they didn't like him. It was the cool kids. And he pushed Trudeau aside and stood in the front, you know, because I'm America, damn it. You know, we're the ones holding all of you up. You're going to notice me. It was that attitude that Putin was like, I respect that because Putin is very much the same way. He won't push you aside, but he'll whisper in your ear that you just made a big fucking mistake. You know,
I was talking about that recently. You have to be the at the head of anything, to be a CEO or to be a CSO or to be a president, to be anything really successful, you kind of have to be a psychopath at some level. You have to be able to step over some people, a lack of empathy, because the fight to the top, you don't fight. Not I'm not saying in every case, but the majority, the fight to the top requires mental levels that border psychopath, in my opinion. I mean,
I can see that, and there is psychological and scientific study that say, you know, similar. I think it really comes down to you just have to have, you know, let's go back. Look at John Wayne, you know.
Yeah.
A man of great stature. You know, he was huge. Just his sheer size kind of commanded a presence. If he had a weak or timid personality, that would diminish that. You know, so I think it really comes down to not necessarily a psychopath. I think you kind of have to have the tendencies of psychopathy.
Yeah, the traits have to be there a little bit.
And that's with anything, though. I mean, any successful leader of any sort has to be able to say, I will fuck your shit up if you cross me.
Yeah, because
You know what I mean?
you can't climb to the top of anything feeling bad for every person you step over on the way there. It's not possible, because then you would be complete. You'd stay level with them. You got
and not only that, but what kind of leader? I mean, let's look at ancient battlefields. You know, the generals, the leaders of the nations were on the front lines of the fight. You know, we stopped having good leadership when our generals and our presidents, or whatever the hell you want to call them,
right,
stopped fighting from the front. George Washington, for example,
right.
do you know how many times he was shot at on a horseback, charging with the with the colonists against the British? Quite a lot. I think if I remember correctly, he at least caught 1 or 2 bullets in his time.
Well, I mean, that's when leadership. You know, they measured leadership then, not just by
that standard,
right? Not by just ideas, but showing by example.
Yeah,
we don't see a lot of example today. I don't know. I have a hard time understanding why we have a president and not a panel of intelligent people without an ideology. You know what I mean? Like, it seems like we're still behaving like ancient Rome with politics. Mm-hmm. Instead, you should have like the people that lead this nation should be a panel of experts in every field, whether it be food or finance or psychology. And this panel of people should kind of sit together like, well, here's some ideas, and we'll give that to Congress. Because at the end of the day, Congress, mayors, presidents, vice presidents, they're all representatives of us, right? We vote them there.
Supposedly, yeah.
Supposedly. I look at the way votes happen. I still don't really fully comprehend why they happen, but it should be that the people elect representatives. There's like, let's say 50 states. So then you have a panel of 50 individuals from every state, and then each state has a representative of something higher. And then you get to this panel where they're like, well, here's for the best of us all. Not one leader. That's insane. Mm. You're still talking about an empire, you know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the empirical, I mean, if you really look at it, America is going by the Roman, we would be the 4th, maybe the 5th empire.
Right.
You know, because you got Rome, you got, who came after Rome, had a great empire.
Maybe it's a bit of optimism in my youth, but I remember being a teenager and thinking, by the time I'm 40, racism won't even exist anymore. I thought by the time I was 40, that what we see as leadership in this country would no longer exist. I thought for certain that intellectual minds would be there to do things. Like, what made me say that is I remember watching a documentary as a kid, and on this documentary, this person was talking about, well, what can we do to make not just America greater, but the world? How can we make us behave as a species, and how can we help us prolong and take care of our planet? And you hear these things, and you're like, well, by the time I'm older, that's going to happen. And it seems like the only thing that's evolved from my childhood till now is technology, because we certainly haven't. We behave identically to where I was as a kid. The only difference is now we have go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we've devolved, actually. I remember a lot more respect. Like, I go through, even semi-recently, I've gone to some old towns that I grew up in, and with all the older people that were much younger in my years, 25, 30 years ago, with them all being gone, be it dead or infirmed, mutual respect and stuff just ain't the same. We have devolved in the past 25 years. And as funny as it sounds, take the Twisted Tea happening. You know, the Twisted Tea heard around the world, which happened right up here in Toledo, Ohio. That probably would not have happened in the 90s. Right. And that's not too terribly long ago. I know there's probably some listeners right now that maybe weren't even born in the 90s, but you and I that were children, that would have never been a thing. Right. Because there was just a lot more respect. Not as much, definitely not as much as there was in, say, the 50s, but most places, generally, people weren't that attention-seeking. It has devolved with technology's evolution. Humanity has devolved, and it's kind of problem. And I'm not going to blame solely technology. It seems like technology has just enabled the worst parts of humanity to take shape. Look at these trends. Like you said, people look for likes and validation through, attention. TikTok, as I like to call it, TikToxic.
Right.
It's just portraying the worst side of humanity and setting it as an example. I mean, it's one of the things that, children, anytime they're, oh, have you seen this on TikTok? I'm like, please listen to me. I know I sound like an old fogey, even though I'm only 35. Get off of that app. Ditch that app. Ditch social media as much as possible. Only use it in the sense of to keep in contact with people that you would not otherwise get to, because it's only leading you down a path of destruction. As a teenager, if we would have had, you and I, like I said, close in age, if we would have had something like TikTok or Instagram, MySpace was bad enough, but not that bad. But if we would have had the level that these kids have today, think of how debauched and animalistic we would have turned out.
Easily. I'll say this much. I say this to a lot of people that know me. My age group included. They're guilty of it. They're watching these 30-second, 40-second videos of entertainment, and I can't do it.
Same.
I can't. I'll tell you, I will sit down and watch a documentary, or I like playing pool, and I want to be able to discern the difference between entertainment and horseshit, right?
Yep.
And so when I say this to people, a lot of people are like, oh, they're critical. Like, well, it's just entertainment. Until one friend of mine who works in psychology he brought it to my attention. He goes, well, you like billiards and you like documentaries and you like shows of education. He goes, you have a cerebral existence, right? So for me to watch something funny, it can't be in 30 seconds. It has to be like maybe a really good comedian or a really good movie or a sitcom. But I can't stand when I see these little small videos and you can easily tell they're doing it just for the gag. I can't bring myself to it, man. And as a kid, I was never home. Even now, if I can help it, I'll go shoot pool. I'll go outside. I'll go for a walk. I'll listen to music, and I'll go to my own place of entertainment in my mind while walking. But I can't do the videos, man. Drives me nuts.
Same. And for me, I'm not a dance kind of person. Like, I like classical dance and stuff. I love it. Ballroom dancing, amazing. But these goofy, almost kind of Tourette's spasms of dance on TikTok, like, it just drives me up the wall. And it's like they're trying to attribute these social causes to 30 seconds. And it's like, is that what you're really going to deduce and basically reduce your whole belief to 30 seconds? Literally the space of a pinch of a thought. Right. You know what I mean?
Now, dude, put this in your mind. And this was brought to my attention. So let's say aliens come to Earth or there's ghosts around you. How many people would actually notice when their screen time is incredibly high? They're 360. When I say 360, their ability to perceive their surroundings is non-existent. I was on a walk the other day and I saw a kid and his parents on a walk in a beautiful sun of Florida looking at their phones.
Yep.
I was like, what?
When I was down in Florida, the only time I was looking at my phone was trying to find directions to the place if I had never been there or if I couldn't innately figure it out. Other than that, it's like, fuck my phone. My phone was in my back pocket, maybe playing Spotify.
Right. Right. Give me some music to march to.
Yeah. Something to keep me focused. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the sounds, like they're, as I've said before on, previous with you and even private chats, I love the sounds like Deerfield Beach and Lighthouse Point. I love the sounds because being from so far inland, we don't hear that. So for me, it's all a new experience and I love it. Yeah. So it's like, I've seen the same. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that about, seeing them walking like that. At my job, I actually had to literally save one of my coworkers from serious injury because she had her headphones in and was looking at her phone. I had to grab her arm and drag her back from almost getting hit by a fucking forklift.
It's crazy. I mean, I can't do it. I have friends and I have relatives. I see this happen. We'll sit on the couch. They'll invite me over. We'll watch a movie and they're on their phone. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, and then they dare ask you like, hey, what just happened? You're kidding, right?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm not invested in the movie, I will pull out my phone.
Yeah, same. If it's something I'm watching, if let's say the girl, she's like, hey, let's watch this movie. And you're like, shit, I got to watch this. Of course, I'm going to go to the phone. But when I'm like, here's an example. And it was a massive disappointment. The Batman. I was really looking forward to the Batman. And I watched it, all 3 hours of it. And I was disappointed, but I didn't pull my phone out. I was invested. I'm going to watch this. I'm going to render an opinion afterward, and with no disruption. Although I was really disappointed. I really personally think that the Batman should have been Christian Bale handing the torch to the next guy. I mean, how else is Batman around for decades other than maybe he's the new guy, right? The apprentice.
The Batman movie I tried to watch, I think I made it an hour and a half, and my brain was literally so done. I just fell asleep. I couldn't help it. Like I was like a narcoleptic. I'm staring. I'm waking up, and the movie's long been over, and I'm like, what happened?
Yeah, I hate to say, Christian Bale did a great job, man. I don't know how they're gonna measure to that. You know what I mean? Like, how are they gonna do it?
To answer, Batman handing the torch, how's he been around for decades? For me, I would say, why don't we just finally give in that it's the Arkham Asylum theory? Batman is not a real vigilante. He's a mental patient in Arkham Asylum that went nuts because of his parents dying. And, it was so traumatic that his mind snapped. He's now locked away in a padded cell, imagining that he's this Cape Crusader flying around. The Joker is not a villain. The Joker is the doctor. Harley Quinn is the head nurse, the charge nurse. And that's why he hates them.
Well, that's from a comic book from a long time ago. That's been I don't know. Yeah, why didn't they make a movie about that? That'd have been a great idea.
Yeah, and it sums it up, and it actually ties in with a bunch of the other superheroes that they're all patients in Arkham Asylum, because it's like, why is it, Dr. Octavia is, the bad guy, but really, if you look at it, he's more like the college professor that Peter Parker hates because he's too strict or too forward-thinking for Peter Parker's liking. So Peter Parker, being insane, associates this professor as this nanobot technology-armed creature that's trying to destroy the city. It's stuff like that. It's kind of what tore me away. It's kind of sad because I look around and there's so many people, even my age, that enjoy the comics and stuff even still today, and I look at it and those kind of things come to mind, and I'm like, that actually makes more sense, and I just can't enjoy it. So the last quote unquote superhero movie that I've watched more than once or made it all the way through has been the Deadpool series, but that's just because of the humor and the outlandish making fun of itself elements. I think Ryan Reynolds does it great of poking fun at himself as a superhero.
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. So on this note, on the Arkham Asylum and the idea of something being completely cerebral, now we'll move into this. And you can kind of mesh religion, ufology, and the paranormal all into it. What are your thoughts on us being in a simulation?
At this point, having experienced what they call quote unquote glitch in the matrix, fucking likely as all get out.
Right. Because if you really look at ufology and the paranormal, now I'm not saying I'm 100 into it, but after hearing people speak about it, it would make me question, how would I know? Like if it's that sophisticated of a program, because I think here's what it is. People are like, well, I remember being a kid, and how do you explain the technology? It's a program. We see this in video games all the time. This is, and so the point I make is something's sophisticated and more advanced than us and been around long before us, they would create a program where we would evolve the way they think we should evolve in a world that we live on, or a universe for that matter.
Look at The Sims.
Right. Exactly.
Now, for you and the listeners, those of you let's call it over the age of 30 right now, go back to your childhood. Do as best as you can to remember when you were 5 years old, roughly, let's say 1985 to 1995. A nice 10-year gap there. Even if you were before 1985, think back when you were a kid. Remember how many times you looked up at the sky. Think about that real clear. If you have to, close your eyes and envision it. Take yourself back to there. Do you remember the color of the sky? Now think about it. Open your eyes and look at the sky now when there's no clouds. The sky color has changed. It changed in 2001.
I can't definitively say I remember as a kid looking at the sky, other than I don't know, looking at fireflies it's always at night, so I really wouldn't be able to tell. I don't remember staring at the sky as a kid.
See, that's one of the things that it gets challenging, because there are those of us who do and those who don't. And you did as a kid. I mean, all kids sit there and they'll stare at the sky and daydream off. So it's like, what part of the simulation did they change that some people just can't remember? You know, like I when I was at work, we were talking about it, and there were a handful of us, you know, so most of the people working there were younger than myself, which kind of makes me feel like an old fart. But, you know, they couldn't remember because they're all post 2001 children. But those of us from the 80s and 90s, they're like, you know, when I mentioned that, they stopped and thought, and they're like, holy shit, it was a deeper blue. It's now a pale, almost kind of like a light ocean blue.
Huh.
And they're like, what the hell? What? And they're like, is this some kind of magic trick? I'm like, no.
Well, like, so you're saying like maybe a patch was had?
Something of that sort. I mean, and they'll try. Don't get me wrong, listeners. People throw this out there. Climate change.
Well, yeah, and then
bullshit. It's all bullshit.
I've heard so many different things in climate change that here's a reality about that. Let's move to, or let's get into this real quick. Of the planet, every 26,000 years changes. That's how we have ice ages, and we're currently very close to that 26,000 year mark, right? Where we might be looking. I've noticed in Florida over the course of the last couple of years, in May, this time of the year, like last year, it got to like 60 something degrees here a few times. Like, whoa.
Yeah,
my
I remember hearing
life.
you guys panic about that.
Yeah, I was like, what is that all about, right?
We're going to see snow. We're all going to die.
Yeah, I'm not cool with it, man. I can't even stay so I can be in the heat. So, but the point I make is the planet's going to change. So climate change is there. I mean, it could play a small effect, but let's keep in mind how powerful this marble is we're on. I mean, it'll kick us off when it's ready.
Yeah.
So, but back to the simulation thing now. I'd spoken to someone. I'm going to speak in a little more at length with him coming soon. The ufology and the paranormal and religion and the entities we see and the realms and the different things. This is something it sounds fantastic when we talk about it, but if you look in certain video games and computer programs and simulation models, it's practical. It's normal. In fact, if every game you play online, whenever they put a job or mission or they put like a building in there, it's either below or under the map or somewhere there that you can't perceive it. They hide it from you in plain sight. And when someone explained that to me, I was like, holy shit. I don't and even like you just said, how often you look at the sky? Well, I don't stare at it very often, which is why I'm probably guilty of not seeing anything that I'm investigating. I plan to soon, but I never put a lot of thought into that. Everything in video games have subtextures and they have sub areas and places that they put stuff that only developers could access. And then you consider what it is that we call anomalies in reality, or our version of reality, and perhaps maybe these realms that these entities come and go from, they play by their own kind of set of rules. They're breaking the rules. They're you know what I mean? Like angels and demons and aliens and ghosts. Maybe they're breaking some rules to come in and out of our mainframe.
I wouldn't say breaking rules, but here's how I explained it to a client once upon a time that they were wondering. So to break it down in a way that modern people would understand, particularly gamers, for those of you listeners and even for you, Adam, that play the Elder Scrolls, going back as far as Morrowind. So you're looking at early 2000s, last 20 years. When you enter, so you've got the world, let's use Morrowind, for example, or even Skyrim. When you're out there in the free roaming world, you're on the map. Now, when you enter like a cave, a dungeon, even the player houses, those are not part of the map. Like you said, those are all on a separate side. What you're doing is you're entering that doorway. That doorway then transports you to a new side of the map that is not part of the free roam world. That's much the same way as in spirit definition. So like when I do a ritual, I'm opening that door and I'm crossing through that doorway into another side of the, let's call it the world.
Huh.
Is that making sense?
That does make sense to me. I'll tell you why. Everything you just said computes to me, and maybe not other people are going to listen, but I played this game. I've been playing this game. It's freaky. It's called Dying Light 2.
Yeah, love Dying Light.
Yeah, I play it with really low gamma, so for those that don't understand, I keep it really dark, so it's creepy. And that game examples that too. There's certain places when you go, you're in a free map, but when you go into a certain area, it's a subtexture that would otherwise not be in the free roaming area. So it makes sense. And then you take all that information and you apply it to a higher scale of something that's predates us, that's obviously more sophisticated, more advanced. And if we are in a simulation, it would be really hard to tell the difference. It would, because that, I think that troubles me to hear that, because not because of I'm in a simulation and it's torture here, but because you want to kind of feel like your existence means more. And I think that's what causes problems with a lot of people.
Well, that comes to when I say the Avatar, some people think of The Last Airbender or the James Cameron flick, which the James Cameron flick was onto something.
Yeah.
That Avatar in the movie, where he interfaces with it through that pod and is able to walk around Pandora as one of them. That's very akin to us in the simulation. Our higher selves are in the pod controlling these avatars,
Right.
You'll hear myself, I've talked in depth about it since about last year, how innately we know in the world things are there. You know what I mean?
Right.
Other people have mentioned it at length too. I think what that is our higher selves in the pod have a better understanding of the simulation, whether it's because we've been through it so many times, or maybe we just understand the code. Look at some of us that are just natural born gamers. We'll get into games and we already kind of know the mechanics, even though we've never picked up this game before. It's
Right.
a lot like that, in that sense, as the simulation is. We Seven, him and I, the band Seven, he's got a song called The Simulation. Him and I have talked in a little bit of depth many a times about, being in a simulation and kind of how it affects, when you start to realize it, how it affects how you quote unquote play the game. When you have this inbuilt understanding of the mechanics, myself as an example, a magician, I've learned how to manipulate that side of the code. I can teach others. I can teach you, Adam, exactly how to manipulate it as I do. It will take time, because it took me time to learn how to,
Right.
refine and figure it out. If I could spend probably a quarter of that time with you on a daily basis, I could teach you the same thing. In a sense, that would make us magicians kind of like hackers in a way, or modders of the simulation.
Well, yeah. I mean, so real quick, the James Cameron movie with Avatar, that's exactly how the small gray aliens, that's what I think they are. I think they are biological robots. When I say biological robot, I think I failed to expand on that with some of my other guests. That's exactly what I think. I think the taller gray aliens control the smaller ones in that exact sense. I think I think the small gray aliens are up for rent too. Because consider this: if there's other races of aliens that found our planet and find us interesting, obviously they're like, well, listen, don't go down there and bother them, man. These people are a little off. They're crazy. Just watch them. They're entertaining, but they're crazy. We don't know if you'll get sick from them, if you can breathe air. We have these tested, proven little gray guys. And this is the new version, 2022. You could just use them as avatars. Go down there and do whatever experiments see fit. And I hear from a lot of experiencers about the talls, when they come to them, that they're always in a form of like they're coming through walls. It's misty. It could be an advanced projection, a very advanced projection. The only time they ever see them in a physical sense that's not projection-like is that when we're taken to their ship in their environment. And so that's in and around my hypothesis, the theory I run with anyway.
Well, let me, as a former contactee, let me kind of touch a little bit on that might give you some new things to think about. Yes, some of the small grays are indeed biomechanical. Those ones can be spotted by, if you're conscious during the interaction, or if you're even alert, you can mentally project a thought to them, and you will see the sides of their head glow in either a electric blue or kind of like a neon green. It looks like little, almost like wires, like a fiber optic running alongside their heads. And I don't mean like wires literally, it's inside. Their skin is almost semi-transparent in those areas.
Right.
Those are the biomechanical. Now, there are actual biological grays. They're very akin to dolphins. They feel like dolphins. You being in Florida, I don't know if you yourself have ever swam with dolphins or
no, but I've been kicked out of an aquarium for touching one, but I know what you mean.
There you go. Okay, perfect. So you know what they feel like. That is what a biological gray extraterrestrial feels like, almost identical to a dolphin.
Huh.
They actually cleanse themselves with a similar liquid that is very close to what we use as hydrogen peroxide, because that's how they remove waste material from their bodies, pollutants and such.
I've heard that before, by the way, from a few other people off podcast interviews. I've heard this a few times where they
the vats.
Yeah, it's like an excretion that they wipe away. Yeah.
Yep, it's a vat. It actually works on humans. Funny enough, I in my time as a contactee, they actually demonstrated it to me, and it does work. Trying it here on Earth, I wouldn't suggest, because they have a different mixture and a much more controlled. The vats are much more technologically controlled than just throwing yourself in a bathtub full of hydrogen peroxide. But that's how they do. And then, like you said, the other races, you've got the tall whites, you've got the tall grays, you have the Orion grays, the Nordic grays, you've got the Nordics, you've got the Alpha Draconians, you've got the Draconians, the reptilian species that go beyond just Draconian. Then you have the Lyrans, which are cat-like, Syrians, which are dog-like, which we start to think like, the whole simulation side of things. We keep dogs and cats as pets.
Right.
These are, looking at it evolutionary wise, it doesn't make sense exactly, because it's like, how did we get from fucking dinosaurs to dogs and cats?
Right.
They've tried to bridge the gap, but it really doesn't work.
There is definitely a part. So to kind of support what you're saying, I'm a huge fan of documentaries, and I, just like you, got to the point where they're discussing dinosaurs and mankind and the gap in between. And there's an enormous DNA gap there, an enormous one, almost as if we were, if you want to call it almighty creator, something engineered our existence, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. There's no way there's that large a gap that we can't account for.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say that's opinion. I mean, that's a pretty good questioning basis.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about dogs and cats, they're not natural to nature either. We manipulated that DNA to create them because they're cute, and I want to keep them as pets, but I don't want them big and angry. You know what I mean?
I don't want them trying to eat my face because I'm made of meat.
Right, exactly. We engineered animals to our liking. Same what we've done. We have engineered fruits and vegetables to our liking and how we could preserve them longer and make them in greater mass. So when people are naysayers to the idea there being a higher intelligence that maybe manipulated our existence, it's impossible to say that. Like, what people listen, Elric, there are people who say abductions that's nonsense. Well, is it? Because we abduct all the time. I say this in a lot of podcasts. We abduct animals all the time. We abduct people all the time. Yes. We conduct experiments on all sorts of shit. Everything you can name, anything that's ever lived on this planet, we have cut apart to examine the inside and then said, how can we change this? How can we clone this? How can we make it better? How can we make more of them? I want a pet giraffe. I saw a commercial. You remember this commercial with the little giraffe?
Yep.
I feel like that should happen.
I mean, we've already got the Shetland ponies, and there's even the mini horses.
Yeah, I would definitely want a pet giraffe. No question.
I could see that. Like, that would be a headline. Florida man walking his pet giraffe.
In a heartbeat, I'd do that, right? I mean, its head would come to about my sternum. It would make sense for me to have this thing.
I mean, if it's stout enough, you could ride it around.
Even better, So, but we're humans, and that's what we would do. Right now, I said that when someone listens to the recording, some little kid is going to hear it's like, you know what? He might be onto something. And in 20, 30 years, that kid's going to be the inventor of the new pet giraffe.
Possible. I mean, and it really comes down, like you said, about, people saying abductions are nonsense. I've had people say that to me. They have no clue that I'm a former contactee. They've never listened to me on any podcast talk about it, anything. They'll tell me that. And I'm like, really? And they're like, oh yeah, it's just government things, or it's just, crazy, insane people. And I'll have a conversation with them, hour, 2 hours long, maybe longer. And then at the end of it, I'll point out, I myself have experienced those. multiple times,
Yeah.
both unconscious and conscious. And like you said about them, zipping through walls and stuff. I myself, during my contacts, have actually had them physically touch me while, and I don't mean this in some weird perverted way, like somebody's probably going to take it. But they've actually touched me before, like reached out and touched my hand or touched my arm.
I mean, if you consider what a projection is, and if you're intelligent enough, and I know we're working on this as humans, you can manipulate that energy to be physical. I don't doubt it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. To a point, they do use projections in what they call high risk cases. I actually remember one during my time where there was a older gentleman they had been picking up since childhood, and he had started to become aware of it and had become defensive. So when they would pick him up, he was actually in northern Minnesota. When they would pick him up, he was a high risk because he slept next to his bed. He slept with a loaded 12 gauge because of these things that were coming after him.
Right.
His neighbors thought he was crazy. And, rightfully so. The normies aren't going to understand.
Well, yeah,
this,
we're humans. Like, you remember the movie Independence Day, and they had the news broadcast, like, oh, listen, we're going to ask the people in South LA to stop shooting at the UFOs, because that's what we are.
Yeah. And so, like, when they picked him up, yes, they had to use the holograms at first to sedate him. But as others, other pickups, one of the people I actually met and had a friendship with for a little while, she was actually part of the same group. We had been picked up at the same time. That was one of the ways we started to kind of form our friendship, was we were really familiar with each other. Right. Like, it was that moment where you point your fingers at each other and it's like, I know you from somewhere, but we were from opposite sides of the country, So there was no way. We had never crossed paths physically outside of that. And then as we started to delve into our experiences, that's when we realized that we were part of the same group that had been picked up at the same times. So to think, picking me up in Ohio, picking her up in, central US in Earth flight time, that's a couple hours. They were doing this shit in minutes. It was only a 10-minute trip from Ohio to her via their craft. Yeah. So it's like,
now try to imagine, because here's what humanity's doing. Our next step, we're going to create our own simulations. This is already existing. It's going to go further. Now, hypothetically speaking, we're in a simulation. Eventually, we're going to get to the point where we're a simulation within a simulation, which I think will maybe start unlocking some answers, right? And then there's another part.
I mean, we already have Second Life by Linden Labs. That was their goal. And we're even starting to touch up on that with like VR chat, Oculus games. They are literally already, and as you said, we're not even just pioneering it. We're already in the process of trying to build where you can live a virtual life just by strapping on a headset, and you no longer cease to be in this world. You're in that world by sight, sound, smell, taste, and feel.
And the only way to discern the difference really is perception.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Do you remember when we were kids, the fear of VR? Because you remember the Virtual Boy, right?
Yeah, I do actually.
Remember the fear that the media and even naysayers were saying about that? Oh, these kids are going to lose touch with reality in this virtual reality. There were, I want to say 94 and 96. There was a early startup that was trying, you had to take a pill that was like a slight psychoactive.
It was an advanced nootropic. I remember they called it.
Yep. And it altered to where you lost sense of reality. So when you went into the virtual reality program that they had
better accepted,
you couldn't tell that in your mind, you had just literally opened this door, which was really just a big giant like aircraft hangar. And it was all white, but you were seeing through the VR headset, you were seeing a whole new world, and you were free to roam around this world because the walls of the aircraft hangar were a barrier in the simulation.
They based movies on it too. The Lawnmower Man. I forget the name. Keanu Reeves did a movie like that long before The Matrix. I can't remember.
Shit, it actually came out
Johnny something. Maybe Medtronic.
No, there was that one, but there was it came out on my birthday, June 4th of 2006, 2008. It was slightly animated. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I recall that. I didn't watch it.
It's not bad because it really it's kind of along the lines of Matrixy, but I want to say like in game, but that's not the right word. It's something else.
So real quick to give you kind of an idea what I think is coming, where again involving the paranormal, ufology, religion, gods, angels, demons, all of it. Eventually, we're going to have it so there's Neuralink and products like it, where there's a chip in the brain. It's there to correct and help issues, but eventually we're going to get to the point where humanity is communicating with no words, right? We're going to have a knowing. And eventually, and like anything else that humanity gets, we get a really good computer. How do we hack this and make it better? Well, eventually...
Also, how do we fuck it up?
Right. We're going to bridge the gap between conscious and subconscious, and our perception will increase. Because when you have a chip in your brain, essentially you're a cyborg, and you're allowing yourself to use the full capacity of your brain. Well, a lot of people are going to die right away, but there are some that are going to be able to perceive all these things that we call abnormal. And I think that's when we'll start getting basically real answers, right? That's when we'll start viewing each other as a species and not as an individual, because you're seeing past that. There's a knowing. You just see a person for what they are, just a raw energy harnessed inside of a fleshy machine. And when we get to that point, a lot of the things like our visitors, a lot of these celestial things are going to be able to communicate with us at a better rate and probably a frequency that we can all understand.
I mean, that's the hope. I would like to maintain that optimism. At the same time, being a notorious game modder, I'm always looking, I'm guilty of it on even GTA 5. I go into private lobbies by myself and figure out, how can I change this?
Exactly.
How can I make this the way I want it to be? That same mentality is going to breed in through transhumanism.
Yeah.
And I myself am of the, let's call it, lawful neutral in terms of that hacking. I know others that are not of the same volition, that are of the more malicious version.
Yeah, they're going to be more an invasive person. And the people that would be more invasive with that sort of technology for, a chip in the brain cyborg thing, of course the government's going to weaponize it. No question.
Oh, not even the government, just individuals, but yeah.
Right. So it's unfortunate. We're humans. For whatever reason, everything that we find great, we weaponize it first, and then it becomes, practical application. But you're right. There are going to be people out there that would use it for not so great reasons. It'd be very invasive. There's just people that are invasive. They got to, not just to tap into your privacy, but just to be a bully all out.
Bully, control freaks. I mean, look at psychology. Psychology has become, it was first used and explored to understand the differences. Why are some people one way? Why is one person this way and another 10,000 aren't? And then it became a way to control people. I mean, right. look at the dark age of psychology with lobotomies being handed out like freaking suckers at the dentist.
Yeah, and then the three-letter acronyms wanted to get it to see if they can create perfect soldiers or perfect spies. Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, it's just the way we are. I mean,
yeah, and then even now it's like psychology's been diluted by. Let's use social media. It's been diluted by social media.
Oh, horribly.
Somebody gets on there. I've been, the target of this numerous times, 2 major times in the past 2 years. People say that I am this terrible narcissistic monster or whatever. And it's like, where did you get your psychology degree? And I'm not even a fan of like the degrees, because I have a good understanding of psychology just from in-depth study, because it amuses me, it interests me.
Well, what I'm saying is you learned it, and you don't have a degree. A degree just means here's this piece of paper says I could get a job. But there's people that study this in depth, and they don't care for the degree. They're there to learn it for the purpose of education, for a higher elevation of mind. Period.
Mm-hmm. One of my friends, she's got a few degrees in psychology-based things. She's actually a licensed therapist. And I, in my study, undegreed, have matched wits with her and even given her a new perspective on things like, for example, sociopaths, psychopaths.
Right.
it's not that they can't feel empathy. It's just that some of them choose not to. If they do feel it, they don't understand it because they've never had a point of reference.
Right.
And it's things like that. So it's like bridging that gap. And that's why her and I get along so well. And she loves talking to me because of the fact that I bring a new perspective that wasn't just, here's the book, parrot the book, here's your degree, GTFO, to a practice that is endorsed by Pfizer or endorsed by, National Health and Safety if you're in the UK. It's one of those things of it's an outward look that doesn't sit there and say, oh, well, this is what I learned in the book and there's nothing more.
Yeah.
There's a hell of a lot more than what's in that book.
Yeah. It's scary. It's scary to follow just a book and get rid of your instincts, because sometimes your instincts play a greater role. You could be more approachable. You could identify a problem quicker, but there's such a weird fine line that humans play with. It's hard to say the difference anymore. It scares me a little bit.
We encountered that in the LHP, the left-hand path of spirituality of magic. There's a great many people, sadly, that just want to follow a book. Like, I could not count on both of my hands and feet, your hands and feet, and half of the listeners of how many people have come to me, be it one-on-one or on my live streams or, in podcast comments or whatever, that have come to me and said, Elric, I followed insert this book, whatever book it could be. It could be from any author. I mean, there's some authors I don't even want to name because I don't want to give them recognition.
Right.
But there's ones that, I followed I followed Solomon Seals this way, and this is what happened. And it's just like what was in the book. And I'm like, okay, so you just role played it.
Yeah.
I myself, when I do any of my rituals, anything, I do not follow a book. I will look at the book if it interests me, if it's something that I'm like, like celestials. That's kind of a newer thing for me. I've always held a grudge against them for some things long ago. But since having a new experience with El Shaddai and realizing that it's not all the way I thought it was, I've looked at a few books, talked to a few seasoned practitioners on the celestial side, gotten their feedback, what kind of traits, what sorts of things, of your experience can I take into factor. But other than that, all of it goes out the window when I'm sitting there and calling on that being or heading down that path. For example, if you go to my Order of Defiant Darkness on Facebook, you go back to October of 2019, I did a ritual called the Bottomless Pit, which was the formula I used was based off of another practitioner, his work. And I fully attributed that to him. I just adjusted it more for my paradigm, my personal experiences, and went with it. And I got an astounding result. After I posted that, I believe it was October 31st of 2019, by November 5th, I had so many people messaging me saying they followed it exactly as I had put. And there was only maybe 10 that got a quote unquote different result than me. Nothing too terribly different, but just their own basis, which told me which ones actually did it. Because a lot of the people were just following it step by step and they were just playing it in their minds, because I made the mistake of putting what I was doing and then the follow-up, in-depth explaining my experiences, and people were telling me how they had identical experiences.
Yeah. And a good thing too is that you allowed something from the past that bothered you to not play an effect on what it is you're doing moving forward. You evolved the way you were thinking. You didn't stay like some people have this habit of they're like, well, I had a bad experience with that. I'm done, period. I'm not even going to try to go that direction anymore. And that's what you did right there. You evolved from that. You allowed yourself to recognize a problem and move forward from it. So you didn't isolate because had you isolated that, perhaps you wouldn't be doing what you're doing today.
No, not at all. I mean, hell, using a good example of that is, realizing that being too much at once, prior to 2021, when I started getting back in after my long break due to, damn near dying, I was just too available to everyone, always 24/7. Somebody could call me, want to talk about, whatever. You know, it could be something they did magically, something spirituality going on. Sometimes I would even have clients, would-be clients or former clients that would still call me because I was kind of like a therapist to them in that sense.
Right.
And, you know, I would always be there for them. And there were a few of those people, like they weren't even clients on the case. They were what I thought to be friends that turned on me and said some of the most disgusting and malicious things about me that were absolutely untrue, solely because my popularity was a stepping stone to them.
Well, that's unfortunately, that's humans, man. They love, I said this to someone just today. When you're high up, people want to pull you down right away. Always, every time. Doesn't matter how loved or adored you might be. For every great, if you ever want to see the real vicious face of humanity, go on social media, say something positive, and watch how many negative spins you can get on it. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, I actually, I mean, I myself, I see that fully. I have kind of switched the direction of Order of Defiant Darkness from being just solely based on like infernals. And a lot of people have given me feedback about, oh, you know, we miss your Demon of the Day post, or, you know, your interactions, you know, why don't you do them anymore? And I tell them, one, because it's really just a case of either most other posts of that nature is literally just copy pasted from the Dictionary Infernal, Solomon's Seal, or some modern day, you know, author.
Right.
And if they throw in their own experiences, that's diluting your experience. If you ask me, like if you came to me, Adam, and said, what is your experience with, say, Abaddon? I will tell you, not in full detail unless you start asking for great detail. I will tell you on the surface, so as not to dilute, so that way you don't go in with an expectation.
Right.
Excuse me. You know, the expectation really ruins a lot of spirituality. And it's one of the things I can't stand about a lot of these social media gurus is they want to sit there and tell you in exact detail, step by step by step, how it should go. And if it doesn't go this way, then it's not real. And it's like, well, no, it is real. It's just your personal paradigm.
Right.
You know?
And you can't, it's really hard to give someone experiences. If someone shows up to anything and they're wearing filters in advance, they're not going to learn anything. They're not going to excel because they have a preset idea of what they expect and what they want.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the things, you know, someone that was very close to me, when I was teaching her the basics and interactions and such. And I told her, do not go into this expecting what I had happened to me. You know, cast all that aside, forget all that for the time when you're going into this. That is the most powerful way. And when she did it that way, she had mind-blowing, like I remember one night actually, she did a ritual and she messaged me and she was so excited. And she's like, I've got to talk to you. Like, we've got to chat. And I'm like, okay, hold on. You know, I was in the middle of something. I got done with that, wrapped it up kind of quickly, talked to her, and she was literally just off the walls excited because she had never experienced something that profound and that focused. And she goes, I did exactly what you said about, you know, don't factor yours in, just go into it. You know, here's the signs that, yes, this entity is standing there before you, because she couldn't see or hear them.
Right.
So she goes, you know, you mentioned the signs and that's all I looked for. And she goes, and I got, you know, all this. And she's like telling me all about it. And she was so excited. And I was like, congratulations. That's exactly what you should be getting all the time. You know?
Agreed. On that note, before we close out, again, I'll put it in description, but just explain to people where they could find your website, the Facebook stuff, where they could reach out and perhaps, you know, get a mentorship or learn.
So the website is orderofdefiantdarkness.com. Facebook, just search Order of Defiant Darkness. You'll know it by the burning pentagram, inverted pentagram. The common acronym is ODD. That makes it easy to find in that way. Instagram, Order of Defiant Darkness. YouTube, Order of Defiant Darkness. If you want to communicate with me specifically, seek me out on Facebook under Gregory Rasputin. That's the profile that I use for Order of Defiant Darkness. Just send a message request or a friend request. If you do send a friend request, drop me a message, say, hey, I found you via 3PNR, or, however you found me. Just let me know so that way I know where you're coming from. Other than that, it's really not hard to find me. I mean, you'll see me under Elric Ragoczy on Facebook. That's my private account. I don't generally accept messages or friend requests from people that I don't know of decently well. So again, use the Gregory Rasputin. You can also contact on the website, or you can get a hold of myself or any of the other admins on the Facebook or the Instagram.
Excellent. Elric, I had a great time talking to you again. We're definitely going to have to do it again. We have a lot to cover still, believe it or not.
Oh, definitely.
And those of you that are listening, whether it be day, night, evening, whatever it is, we're going to say farewell to you. And I'm going to talk to Elric in post. Have a good time, everyone.
Stay defiant, everybody.